Sometimes a woman's only choice is to leap from a moving stagecoach into a Wyoming blizzard. Sometimes that leap changes everything. In the spring of 1884, 20-2-year-old Lillian Avery discovered her mail-order marriage contract had been sold to Blackjack Kincaid, one of the territory's most wanted outlaws, when she overheard his gang bragging about using their sham wedding to legitimize his criminal empire. She made a desperate escape into the snow-covered wilderness with nothing but her father's unfired Colt and a velvet reticule. Stumbling through the storm, she flagged down the one rider bold enough to travel in such weather, Barrett Cole, heir to the Diamond C cattle empire and the richest cowboy west of Denver. What began as an act of mercy would become something far more dangerous when Kincaid declared Barrett a rustler and demanded his bride back. Would Lillian find the courage to fire her first shot to save the only man who treated her as more than a bargaining chip? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled across the Wyoming territory like a banshee's cry, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of harder days ahead. Through the swirling white curtain of the late spring blizzard, Barrett Cole squinted into his grandfather's silver spyglass, the brass fittings cold against his weathered fingers. The instrument had served 3 generations of Coles, from his grandfather's cavalry days through his father's political campaigns, and now it helped Barrett navigate both the physical landscape and the complex terrain of human nature. What he saw through that lens made his blood run cold. A lone figure in dark clothing stumbling through the drifts, arms wrapped tight around what appeared to be a small bag. The figure moved with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing rather than traveling, each step a battle against the elements and exhaustion. Barrett had been riding the back trails for 3 days now, carrying medical supplies and feed to the Sioux Henderson spread where hoof rot had claimed half their cattle. It was the kind of quiet charity he'd learned to conduct in shadows, away from the prying eyes of neighbors who might question why the heir to the Diamond C empire concerned himself with struggling homesteaders. His father, Senator Marcus Cole, had made it clear that such associations were beneath their station, but Barrett had long ago stopped caring about his father's opinions on much of anything. The storm had caught him heading home, and any sensible man would have sought shelter hours ago. But Barrett had always been drawn to the wild spaces during Wyoming's worst weather, finding in the howling wind and driving snow the kind of honest conversation he rarely encountered in parlors and political gatherings. The elements didn't lie, didn't scheme, didn't pretend to be something they weren't. Now, watching the struggling figure through his spyglass, Barrett felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He guided his sturdy bay gelding, Thunder, down the slope toward the desperate soul fighting the storm dot as he drew closer. He could see it was a young woman, her dark hair whipping free from what had once been a proper arrangement. Her dress, though torn and mud-stained, spoke of quality, the kind of careful stitching and fine fabric that suggested she hadn't always been wandering alone in blizzards. Most striking of all was the way she clutched a small velvet reticule against her chest, as if it contained her very life. "Ma'am," Barrett called out, his voice carrying over the wind as he approached. "Ma'am, you need shelter." The woman spun toward him, her hand darting inside the reticule. For a moment, Barrett thought she might draw a weapon, and he felt a grudging admiration for her caution. A woman alone in this territory needed to be ready for anything. "I'm Barrett Cole," he said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I've got a warm cabin not far from here, and medical supplies if you need them." Her eyes, he noticed, were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and full of turbulence. "I don't need charity," she said, though her voice shook with more than cold. "No, ma'am, I don't expect you do. But I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I left you out here to freeze." He shrugged out of his heavy wool duster, the one his mother had made before consumption took her when he was 16. "This storm's got teeth, and it's not finished with us yet." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she allowed him to drape the coat around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, but he could see the grateful way she pulled it tight. "My name is Lillian," she said simply. "Lillian Avery. Well, Miss Avery, let's get you somewhere warm before we both turn into ice sculptures." The ride to the Diamond Sea took the better part of an hour, with Lillian seated behind him on Thunder, her arms wrapped around his waist in a grip that spoke of desperation rather than intimacy. She didn't speak during the journey, but Barrett could feel the tension in her body, the way she startled at every sound that wasn't the wind or the horse's hooves. The Diamond Sea ranch house rose from the landscape like a ship from fog, its windows glowing yellow against the storm. Barrett's grandfather had built it to last, with thick log walls and a stone foundation that had weathered 30 years of Wyoming's worst. The main house was flanked by bunkhouses, barns, and corrals that could shelter 300 head of cattle and 24 horses. It was an empire in miniature, carved from raw wilderness by men who understood that survival required both strength and wisdom. As they approached the front porch, the door swung open to reveal Morning Star, the Apache woman who had been the heart of the Diamond Sea household for the past 5 years. She was perhaps 40 years old, with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. Barrett had hired her after finding her half dead from fever on the trail, but she had quickly proven herself indispensable, part cook, part healer, part keeper of the ranch's conscience. "You bring home strays in every storm," Morningstar said, but her tone was warm with affection. Her English was careful and precise, each word chosen with the deliberation of someone who had learned the language as a matter of survival. "This one looks like she's been running from more than weather." Barrett helped Lillian down from the horse, noting how she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. "Morning Star, this is Miss Lillian Avery. She needs food, warmth, and probably a doctor's attention." Morning Star's sharp eyes took in Lillian's torn dress, her mud-caked boots, and the way she clutched that velvet reticule. "Come, child. You need dry clothes and hot soup. The men can wait in the cold while women see to women's business." As Morning Star led Lillian into the house, Barrett caught a glimpse of the interior, a massive stone fireplace his grandfather had built, the Indian rugs that added warmth to the polished wood floors, the family portraits that chronicled 3 generations of coal men and the strong women who had stood beside them. It was a home built for permanence, for raising children and weathering storms both literal and metaphorical, but it was also a home marked by absence. Barrett's mother's chair still sat beside the fireplace, her sewing basket unchanged since the day she died. His father's study remained locked, the senator preferring his grand house in Cheyenne to the rustic comforts of the ranch. Barrett lived here alone most of the time, save for Morning Star and the rotating crew of cowboys who worked the cattle and kept the place running. He saw to Thunder's care, brushing the horse down and making sure he had warm feed and clean water. The barn smelled of hay and leather, familiar scents that always calmed Barrett's mind. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the woman he'd rescued, Lillian Avery. The name had a refined sound to it, suggesting education and breeding, but there had been something in her eyes that spoke of recent trauma. The way she'd reached for what he suspected was a weapon, the desperation in her grip as they rode through the storm, the careful way she'd given only her name and nothing more. By the time he returned to the house, Morning Star had worked her usual magic. Lillian sat by the fire, wrapped in one of Barrett's mother's dresses, a simple blue wool that complemented her eyes. Her hair had been braided and pinned, revealing the elegant line of her neck and the determined set of her jaw. She looked, Barrett thought, like a woman who had been through hell but refused to be broken by it. "The soup will be ready soon," Morning Star announced, ladling something fragrant from a pot hanging over the fire. "And I've prepared the guest room. She'll need rest before she can tell us what she's running from." Lillian looked up sharply at those words. "I'm not running from anything. I'm traveling to meet my intended husband." Morning Star and Barrett exchanged glances. "In this weather?" Barrett asked gently, "Without proper supplies or escort?" Color rose in Lillian's cheeks. "My situation is complicated. Most situations worth having are," Barrett said, settling into the chair across from her. "But you're safe here, Miss Avery. Whatever brought you out into that storm, you're safe now." For a moment, her composure cracked, and Barrett saw the fear beneath her careful control. "I don't know if anywhere is safe anymore," she whispered. Morning Star set a bowl of soup before Lillian, the steam rising like incense in the firelight. "Safety isn't a place, child. It's a choice. The choice to trust, to stand, to fight when fighting is what's needed." As Lillian ate, Barrett found himself studying her face in the flickering light. There was strength there, he realized, the kind that came from facing hard truths and surviving them. But there was also vulnerability, the kind that made a man want to stand between her and whatever had put that haunted look in her storm-gray eyes. Outside, the wind continued to howl. But inside the Diamond Sea, 3 people sat in the warm circle of firelight, each carrying their own secrets, their own burdens. Barrett didn't know what had brought Lillian Avery into his path, but he was beginning to understand that this storm had delivered more than just another soul in need of shelter. It had brought him someone who might need the kind of protection that went far beyond a warm fire and a dry bed. And Barrett Cole, for all his wealth and carefully cultivated reputation, had always been a man who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The pounding on the Diamond Sea's front door came at dawn, sharp and insistent as rifle fire. Barrett was already dressed and drinking coffee in the kitchen when the sound echoed through the house. But something about its urgency made him set down his cup with deliberate care. Morning Star appeared from the pantry, her dark eyes alert. "Trouble rides with the sunrise," she murmured. Wiping her hands on her apron, Barrett checked the Colt at his hip before opening the door. On his porch stood Marshal Tom Hawkins, a thin man with nervous eyes and the kind of mustache that suggested he spent more time grooming it than enforcing the law. Behind him sat 3 riders on horseback, their faces shadowed by hat brims, but their posture radiating menace. "Morning, Barrett," Hawkins said, touching his badge with the self-importance of a man who wore authority like an ill-fitting coat. "We're here on official business." "Official business that requires an armed escort?" Barrett's gaze swept over the mounted men. "What can I do for you, Marshal?" Before Hawkins could answer, one of the riders urged his horse forward. The man was perhaps 35, with black hair and cold eyes that seemed to catalog every detail for future reference. A jagged scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, giving his smile a permanently cruel cast. "Name's Kincaid," the man said, his voice carrying the soft menace of a rattlesnake's warning. "Black Jack Kincaid. I believe you have something." "That belongs to me." Barrett felt his shoulders tense. The name was known throughout the territory, a wanted man who somehow always stayed one step ahead of the law. Banks in 3 counties bore witness to his handiwork, and more than one honest rancher had lost cattle to his gang's midnight raids. "I can't imagine what that might be," Barrett said carefully. "My bride," Kincaid said, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. "Miss Lillian Avery. She was traveling to meet me when her stage ran into some difficulties. I'm told she sought shelter here." Barrett's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "There's no one here by that name." Kincaid reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, the paper crackling as he opened it. "Marriage contract, all legal and proper. Filed with the territorial clerk in Cheyenne. Miss Avery is contracted to marry me, and any man who interferes with that arrangement is breaking the law." Marshal Hawkins nodded eagerly. That's right, Barrett. The law's the law, even for the Diamond Sea. Barrett studied the document, noting the official seals and signatures. It looked legitimate, but something about it felt wrong. The paper too new, the ink too fresh. This contract doesn't give you the right to drag a woman anywhere against her will. Against her will? Kincaid's laugh was like broken glass. She came to Wyoming territory of her own accord, seeking a husband. I paid good money for that contract, and I intend to honor it. His hand rested casually on his gun butt. The question is whether you intend to honor the law. From inside the house came the sound of footsteps, and Barrett tensed as Lillian appeared in the doorway. She wore one of his mother's dresses, a simple green wool that made her eyes look like spring grass, but her face had gone pale as winter ice. "Hello, Lillian," Kincaid said, touching his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy. "You gave me quite a scare, disappearing like that. But don't worry, I'm here to take you home now." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Lillian said, her voice steady despite the terror Barrett could see in her eyes. "I never agreed to marry you." Kincaid's smile widened, showing teeth like yellowed ivory. "Your signature says otherwise, darling. And the law backs me up." He gestured to Marshal Hawkins. "Tell her, Marshal." Hawkins cleared his throat nervously. "Miss, the contract appears to be in order. You'll need to go with Mr. Kincaid." "The hell she will." The words left Barrett's mouth before he could stop them. "No woman leaves my ranch against her will, contract or no contract." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kincaid's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. The outlaw himself studied Barrett with new interest, like a snake deciding whether its prey was worth the effort of striking. "That's interesting," Kincaid said slowly. "Real interesting. Because interfering with a legal marriage arrangement is a serious offense. Some might even call it rustling, stealing another man's property." "A woman isn't property," Barrett said, his own hand now resting on his Colt. "The law says different, and Marshal Hawkins here represents the law." Kincaid's voice had gone soft. "And dangerous. Don't you, Marshal?" Hawkins nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "I'm afraid Mr. Kincaid is right, Barrett. The contract is legal, and you can't interfere." Barrett realized with sickening clarity that Hawkins had been bought. The nervous energy, the way he deferred to Kincaid, the eagerness to back the outlaws. Claims it all pointed to corruption that ran deeper than simple intimidation. "I see," Barrett said carefully. "And if I refuse to turn Miss Avery over?" "Then you'd be breaking the law," Kincaid said, his smile never wavering. "And lawbreakers face consequences. Might even find yourself accused of cattle rustling." Amazing how missing steers sometimes turn up on the wrong ranch, especially when the owner has a reputation for questionable activities. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Barrett understood now this wasn't just about Lillian. This was about Kincaid establishing dominance, showing the territory that even the wealthy Diamond Sea couldn't stand against him. "There's going to be a county fair next week," Kincaid continued conversationally. "Big celebration, lots of people. If Miss Avery isn't ready to honor her contract by then, well, I might have to take matters into my own hands, publicly. You understand?" Barrett felt Lillian move closer behind him, her presence both a comfort and a responsibility that weighed heavier than gold. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Simple. You have until the fair to convince Miss Avery to do the right thing. After that," Kincaid shrugged, "the law takes its course. One way or another, she becomes my wife." Morningstar appeared beside Lillian, her weathered hand resting protectively on the younger woman's shoulder. Her dark eyes fixed on Kincaid with the intensity of a hunting hawk. "Bad spirits follow you," she said simply. "Death rides in your shadow." Kincaid's laugh was harsh. "Apache superstition doesn't interest me, old woman. Legal contracts do. He swung back into his saddle with fluid grace. 1 week, Cole. Don't test me. Marshal Hawkins mounted his own horse with obvious relief. Barrett, I hope you'll see reason. This doesn't have to get ugly. It already is ugly, Barrett replied. Watching as the group prepared to leave Dot as they rode away, Kincaid called back over his shoulder. Oh, and Cole? You might want to keep a closer eye on your cattle. Rustlers have been active in the territory lately. Hate to see the Diamond Sea lose any stock to thieves. The threat was clear as mountain water. Barrett stood on his porch, watching the riders disappear into the morning mist, his mind already working through possibilities and plans. Beside him, Lillian trembled with suppressed emotion. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've brought trouble to your door. Barrett turned to face her, seeing the guilt and fear warring in her storm-gray eyes. The only trouble here's that bastard's assumption that he can ride onto my land and make threats. He touched her shoulder gently. You're under my protection now, Miss Avery. That means something. But the law is whatever Hawkins says it is, and Hawkins has been bought. Barrett's jaw tightened. But there are other kinds of law in Wyoming territory. Older kinds. Morning Star nodded approvingly. The law of the gun. The law of the strong protecting the weak. 1 week, Lillian said, her voice barely audible. He said 1 week. Barrett looked out across the vast expanse of his ranch, the land his grandfather had claimed and his family had held for 3 decades. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. 1 week is plenty of time, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Plenty of time to figure out how to send Blackjack Kincaid straight to hell. As they turned to go back inside, Barrett caught sight of a piece of paper that had fallen from Kincaid's coat during the confrontation. He picked it up, unfolding it carefully. It was another copy of the marriage contract, but this one bore signs of hasty forgery ink smudges, uneven lettering, signatures that didn't quite match. The document was a lie, just as he'd suspected, but lies backed by corrupt lawmen and armed. Men could be deadlier than truth backed by nothing but righteousness. The war for Lillian Avery's freedom had begun, and Barrett Cole intended to win it, no matter the cost. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Diamond Sea's main corral as Barrett watched Lillian handle her father's colt for the first time since arriving at the ranch. Morning Star stood beside her, the Apache woman's medicine bundle hanging from her belt like a tangible connection to ancient wisdom. Your father, he was military man? Morning Star asked, observing how Lillian held the weapon with familiar respect despite her obvious nervousness. Cavalry captain, Lillian replied, her voice tight with concentration as she tried to remember his teachings. He used to say that a gun was like a promise. You should never draw it unless you mean to keep it. Barrett nodded approvingly from where he leaned against the corral fence. Smart man. What else did he teach you? That shooting at targets was different from shooting at people. Lillian's hands shook slightly as she raised the Colt. He made me practice loading and cleaning it, but he never wanted me to have to use it for what it was really meant for. Sometimes life don't give us the choices we want, Morning Star said gently. Sometimes it gives us the choices we need. The medicine bundle at her waist contained sacred herbs and stones passed down through generations of her people, items that could heal wounds both physical and spiritual. Barrett had seen her work with injured horses and sick cattle, her hands moving with the certainty of someone who understood that healing often required understanding the source of pain. Lillian fired 6 shots at the wooden targets Barrett had set up, each one finding its mark, though not quite where she'd aimed. Her form was good. Her father had taught her well, but her confidence wavered with each pull of the trigger. Better, Barrett said as she reloaded. But you're thinking too much. Trust your instincts. My instincts tell me to run, Lillian admitted, holstering the weapon with careful precision. "Keep running until I find somewhere Kincaid can't follow." "Running won't solve this," Barrett said, though he understood the impulse. Men like Kincaid don't give up. They follow. They wait. They strike when you least expect it. As if summoned by his words, Charlie Brennan came riding hard from the eastern pastures, his horse lathered with sweat. Barrett recognized the urgency in the young cowboy's posture before he'd even reached the corral. "Boss," Charlie called out as he swung down from his mount, "we got problems. Found 3 of our steers with their throats cut, left to rot in Willow Creek, and there's sign of riders' looks like they were watching the ranch." Barrett felt cold anger settle in his gut. "How many riders?" 4, maybe 5. They stayed well back, but they were there. Charlie's young face was grim. "This is about that woman, isn't it? The one who came in from the storm?" Before Barrett could answer, Lillian stepped forward. "It's about me. I should leave. I won't have innocent people hurt because of my troubles. You're not going anywhere," Barrett said firmly. And Charlie spread the word to the other hands. "We're doubling the watch, and no one rides alone." As Charlie headed to the bunkhouse to gather the men, Morningstar touched Lillian's arm gently. "Fear makes the spirit small," she said. "Makes it want to hide, to run. But courage makes it grow, makes it fight." That evening, Barrett found himself in the uncomfortable position of seeking help from the one person in Wyoming territory he least wanted to see, his father. The ride to Cheyenne took 2 hours, and every mile reminded him of the gulf that had opened between them since his mother's death. Marcus Cole's house stood on Cheyenne's most prestigious street, a monument to political success that felt as cold and unwelcoming as a mausoleum. Barrett found his father in his study, surrounded by law books and correspondence that spoke of influence and power. "Barrett," the senator said without looking up from his papers, "I heard you'd taken in a stray, some woman causing trouble with unsavory elements." "Her name is Lillian Avery, and she's under my protection," Barrett said, settling into the chair across from his father's massive oak desk. "I need to know about territorial marriage laws, specifically about fraudulent contracts." Senator Cole finally looked up, his pale blue eyes so like Barrett's own, studying his son with cool calculation. "Marriage contracts are binding legal documents. If properly filed and witnessed, they carry the full weight of the law. And if they're forged? Proving forgery can be complicated, especially if the local law enforcement is disinclined to investigate." The senator leaned back in his chair. "I take it this involves Blackjack Kincaid?" Barrett wasn't surprised his father knew. Marcus Cole made it his business to know everything that might affect his political standing. "He claims to have a legal contract for marriage with Miss Avery. I have reason to believe it's fraudulent. Kincaid has connections, Barrett, men who find his particular skills useful. Crossing him could be problematic. Are you telling me to hand over an innocent woman to a known outlaw? I'm telling you to consider the consequences of your actions. The Diamond Sea is valuable, but it's not invulnerable. There are ways to strip a man of his land, his standing, his future. Kincaid knows those ways." Barrett felt the familiar frustration that came with talking to his father. Everything was political calculation, risk assessment, advantage, and leverage. There was no room for simple right and wrong. What would Mother have done? Barrett asked, quietly. For a moment, something flickered in the senator's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "Your mother is dead, Barrett. She died because she couldn't adapt to the realities of this territory. Don't make the same mistake." The words hung between them like a wall of ice. Barrett stood slowly, understanding once again why he preferred the honest brutality of Wyoming weather to the subtle cruelties of civilized conversation. "I'll find another way," he said. "There is no other way," his father replied, already turning back to his papers. "There's only survival and the price we pay for it." Barrett left the senator's house with a bitter taste in his mouth and no more help than he'd arrived with. But the ride back to the Diamond Sea gave him time to think, to plan, to consider options. That didn't involve political, maneuvering, or legal technicalities. He arrived home to find the ranch in quiet but watchful activity. Chuck Winters, his foreman, met him at the stable with a report that chilled Barrett's blood. More trouble, boss. Found tracks near the house someone's been watching, taking measure of our defenses. And word spreading in town that you're harboring a stolen bride. Some folks are getting nervous about being associated with the Diamond Sea. Barrett wasn't surprised. Fear was Kincaid's most effective weapon, and he wielded it with the skill of a master craftsman. Any of our hands talking about leaving? Not yet, but... Chuck hesitated. This is a good job, but it ain't worth dying for. If Kincaid makes it clear that working for you means war, well, men got families to think about. Barrett understood. These were good men, but they hadn't signed on to fight an outlaw war. They'd hired on to work cattle and earn honest wages, not to stand against one of the territory's most dangerous criminals. In the house, he found Lillian and Morning Star sitting by the fire, the older woman teaching the younger to braid leather into intricate patterns. It was a peaceful scene that belied the danger gathering around them like storm clouds. Any luck with your father? Lillian asked, looking up from her work. About what I expected, Barrett admitted, settling into his chair with a weary sigh. He's more concerned with political consequences than justice. Morning Star's fingers never paused in their work, but her dark eyes grew thoughtful. Sometimes the spirits send us troubles to teach us who we really are, she said. Your father has forgotten who he is. You have not. Lillian set down her braiding and looked directly at Barrett. I've been thinking. Maybe there's a way to turn Kincaid's own tactics against him. He uses fear and intimidation because they work. But what if we gave people something stronger to believe in? What do you mean? The county fair. He chose it because it's public, because he wants to make an example. But public works both ways. If we could expose him for what he really is, in front of everyone. Barrett felt a spark of interest. That's dangerous thinking, Miss Avery, and it would require you to stay, to fight rather than flee. Lillian's chin lifted with quiet determination. I'm tired of running. My father didn't raise me to cower before bullies, contract or no contract. Morning Star smiled and added another strand to her braid. The spirits are pleased, she said simply. Courage calls to courage. Fear calls to fear. You choose which song your heart sings. As the fire crackled and the wind whistled around the eaves, Barrett began to see the shape of a plan forming in the shadows of possibility. It would be risky, potentially disastrous, but it might be their only chance to turn the tables on Blackjack Kincaid. The question was whether they could pull it off before Kincaid's patience ran out and his threats became action. 3 days after his fruitless visit to Cheyenne, Barrett stood in his father's old study, staring at the congressional medal that hung in a place of honor above the senator's desk. The medal was tarnished now, its bronze surface dulled by time and neglect, much like the ideals it had once represented. Barrett's grandfather had earned it during the Indian Wars, and his father had worn it proudly during his early political campaigns. Now it seemed to mock everything the Cole family had once stood for. The study itself was a testament to political ambition law books, framed photographs with territorial governors and Washington dignitaries, correspondence that spoke of influence, traded like commodities. But dust covered most surfaces, and the air held the stale scent of abandonment. Senator Cole spent his time in Cheyenne now, leaving the Diamond Sea to Barrett, and his memories. Barrett had come here, seeking some trace of the man his father had once been, some evidence that Marcus Cole had once believed in something beyond political expediency. Instead, he found only the hollow shell of past glories, A knock at the study door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, not turning from the metal. Lillian entered quietly, her boots soft on the polished wood floor. She'd grown more comfortable in the house over the past few days, but Barrett could still see the careful way she moved, as if ready to flee at a moment's notice. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. "Morning Star told me I might find you here." "No intrusion," Barrett assured her, finally turning to face her. "I was just remembering." Lillian's eyes took in the study's contents, the books, the photographs, the weight of history that seemed to press down from every surface. "Your father was a military man?" "Is," Barrett corrected. "Though sometimes I wonder if he remembers. That," he gestured to the medal. "My grandfather earned that fighting alongside men who believed in protecting the innocent. My father used it to build a political career. And you?" Lillian asked quietly. "What do you use it for?" Barrett considered the question, feeling the weight of legacy and expectation. "I'm still figuring that out." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people carrying their own burdens of family history and disappointed expectations. Finally, Lillian spoke again. "I've been practicing with the Colt," she said, "every morning for the past 3 days. Morning Star says I'm improving." "That's good. You might need those skills." "Barrett." She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "Tell me about your mother." Morning Star mentioned she died young. The question caught Barrett off guard, stirring memories he usually kept carefully buried. "Consumption," he said simply. "She fought it for 2 years, but this territory, it's hard on everything soft and beautiful." "You blame your father." It wasn't a question, and Barrett didn't try to deny it. He brought her here from Boston. She never really adjusted to the isolation, the harsh winters, the constant struggle. When she got sick, he was in Washington more often than he was home. Politics came first. That must have been difficult for you. I was 16 when she died, old enough to understand that some things matter more than political advancement, but too young to do anything about it. Barrett touched the medal lightly. She believed in the best of people, thought that justice and law were the same thing. It killed her to learn otherwise. Lillian moved closer, her presence both comforting and disturbing in ways Barrett didn't want to examine too closely. "Is that why you help the struggling ranchers? The ones your father thinks are beneath your station?" Barrett smiled ruefully. "Morning Star's been talking. She cares about you. She says you have your mother's heart, but your grandfather's backbone. I hope that's enough." Before Lillian could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the courtyard. Barrett moved to the window, his hand instinctively checking his sidearm. 3 riders approached the house, not Kincaid's men, but neighbors Barrett recognized. Relief warred with apprehension as he identified Tom Henderson, Sarah Peterson, and old Jake Morrison. "Stay here," Barrett told Lillian, but she shook her head. "If this is about me, I need to hear it." They met the visitors on the front porch, where Morning Star had already appeared with coffee and a kind of quiet dignity that made her presence both comforting and formidable. The 3 ranchers looked uncomfortable, their faces bearing the weathered resignation of people delivering unwelcome news. "Barrett," Tom Henderson said, touching his hat brim in greeting. "Miss, we came to talk." "About what, Tom?" "About the trouble that's been following you lately." Henderson was a good man. Barrett knew, honest, hard-working, the kind of neighbor who'd help you through a hard winter or stand with you against raiders. But he was also a man with a wife and 3 children to protect. Sarah Peterson, one of the few women running her own spread in the territory, spoke next. "Word's getting around that you're harboring a woman claimed by Black Jack Kincaid. Some folks are getting nervous about what that might mean for the rest of us." Barrett felt his jaw tighten. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing that goes against your conscience," old Jake Morrison said quickly. The elderly rancher had been in the territory longer than anyone except Barrett's grandfather. But maybe there's a way to handle this that don't put the whole county at risk. You want me to turn her over to Kincaid. We want you to think about the bigger picture, Henderson said. Kincaid's got connections, Barrett, political ones. He could make life mighty hard for all of us if he sets his mind to it. Lillian stepped forward, her chin raised with quiet dignity. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Henderson, but I won't be handed over to an outlaw like a piece of property, no matter how many people it might inconvenience. Sarah Peterson's weathered face softened slightly. We ain't unsympathetic, miss, but this territory's got a way of making hard choices for people. Hard choices, Morningstar repeated thoughtfully. Yes, sometimes we choose between what is easy and what is right. Sometimes we choose between safety and honor. The spirits watch to see which choice we make. Barrett felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like his grandfather's old cavalry coat. These were good people, people he respected, but they were asking him to abandon everything he believed in for the sake of expedience. I understand your concerns, he said finally, but Miss Avery is under my protection, and she remains so until this matter is resolved properly. The three ranchers exchanged glances. Finally, Henderson nodded slowly. We figured that's what you'd say. Can't say we blame you, though we wish circumstances were different. They are what they are, Barrett replied. After the neighbors left, Barrett found himself standing in the courtyard, watching their dust disappear into the afternoon haze. Lillian joined him, her presence a mixture of comfort and complication. They're frightened, she said. They have a right to be. Kincaid's reputation isn't built on empty threats. I could leave, Lillian said quietly. Disappear into the mountains. Make my own way. It would solve everyone's problems. Barrett turned to face her, seeing the determination and fear warring in her storm-gray eyes. Would it? Or would it just convince Kincaid that intimidation works? That all he has to do is threaten innocent people to get what he wants? What if people get hurt because of me? People are already getting hurt, Barrett said. The question is whether we fight back or let men like Kincaid rule through fear. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with Morningstar, Barrett found himself studying Lillian's face in the lamplight. She'd changed since arriving at the Diamond Sea, grown stronger, more confident, more willing to stand her ground. But he could also see the cost of that strength, the way she carried herself like someone preparing for battle. Your father would be proud, he said suddenly. Lillian looked up from her plate, surprised. What makes you say that? You're not running. Despite everything, Kincaid's threats, the neighbors' pressure, the legal complications, you're choosing to stand and fight. That takes the kind of courage your father tried to teach you. I'm terrified, Lillian admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Morningstar said, passing the biscuits. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. Your father knew this. Barrett's mother knew this. Now you must learn it. Barrett reached across the table and touched Lillian's hand gently. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you're not facing it alone. For a moment, their eyes met and held, and Barrett felt something shift between them, something deeper than shared danger or mutual respect. It was the recognition that some bonds were forged in fire and made stronger by adversity. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled around the eaves, carrying with it the scent of approaching storm. But inside the Diamond Sea, three people sat in the warm circle of lamplight, bound together by choice and circumstance, preparing to face whatever darkness might come. The tarnished congressional nettle, hanging in the abandoned study, might represent disappointed ideals. But here in the kitchen, around this simple table, Barrett was beginning to understand what true honor looked like. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about standing between the vulnerable and the vicious, no matter the cost. The Diamond Sea brand iron lay in the forge fire, its metal glowing cherry red in the pre-dawn darkness. Barrett had been working since before sunrise, preparing for the day's branding while his mind wrestled with plans that grew more complex and dangerous with each passing hour. The brand iron represented more than ranch ownership. It was the symbol of 3 generations of cold determination, the mark that said this land and these cattle belonged to people who would fight for what was theirs. Chuck Winters stood beside him, the foreman's weathered face grim in the firelight. "Boss, I got to ask, are you sure about this plan? Because if it goes wrong, we're all going to be neck-deep in trouble." Barrett lifted the brand iron from the fire, examining the glowing metal with practiced eyes. "I'm not sure about anything, Chuck, but doing nothing isn't an option anymore." The plan they'd been developing was audacious, risky, and potentially catastrophic. In 3 days, the county fair would begin, and with it would come Kincaid's deadline. But instead of simply waiting for the outlaw's move, Barrett intended to force the confrontation on his own terms. "Run through it one more time," Chuck said, checking his pocket watch. "The boys need to understand their parts exactly." Barrett set the brand iron aside and faced his foreman. "We start by spreading word that the Diamond Sea is selling a prime. Heard at the fair. Cash buyers only, no questions asked. That should draw Kincaid's attention. He won't be able to resist the opportunity for easy profit. And Miss Lillian? She'll be there as Mrs. Catherine Morrison, a wealthy widow from Denver, looking to invest in Wyoming cattle. She'll publicly reject Kincaid's marriage claim while our men get into position around the fairgrounds." Chuck frowned. "That puts her right in the line of fire. She insisted on it. Says she won't hide while other people fight her battles." "And if something goes wrong?" Barrett picked up the brand iron again, feeling its weight and heat. "Then we improvise. But we don't let Kincaid win." The sound of approaching footsteps made both men turn. Lillian emerged from the house, dressed in riding clothes and carrying a leather case that Barrett recognized as Morningstar's medicine bundle. The Apache woman followed close behind, her dark eyes alert and watchful. "The spirits are restless this morning," Morningstar announced. "A whisper of change coming, of choices that will echo through generations." Lillian set the medicine bundle carefully on the workbench. "Morningstar has been teaching me about Apache protection ceremonies. She thinks we might need all the help we can get." Barrett studied the bundle with interest. Inside, he knew, were sacred items passed down through Morningstar's family herbs for healing, stones for strength, symbols of power that connected the physical world to the spiritual one. The Apache woman had shared some of her knowledge with him over the years, but this was the first time she'd offered to perform a full protection ceremony. "What does it involve?" Barrett asked. "Acknowledgement," Morningstar said simply. "Acknowledgement that some fights are bigger than the people who fight them. That courage is a gift from the spirits, and gifts must be honored." As the sun climbed higher, more of the Diamond Sea hands gathered in the courtyard. Barrett had sent riders to the distant line camps, calling in every cowboy who could be spared from essential duties. What he saw filled him with quiet pride. Men who could have drifted to safer jobs, but chose to stand with their boss despite the danger. Jake Sullivan, barely 18, but already tough as rawhide, checked his rifle for the 3rd time. "Boss, my pa was at Little Bighorn with your grandfather. He used to say that some fights come to you whether you want them or not, and the only choice is how you face them." "Your pa was a wise man," Barrett replied. "He also said that the measure of a man ain't how many fights he wins, but how many people he protects while he's winning them." Barrett felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. These men were trusting him with their lives, their futures, their family's security. The Diamond Sea brand iron in his hand suddenly felt like more than a tool. It was a symbol of everything he was sworn to protect. Lillian approached him as he watched the men prepare their equipment. "Barrett, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what happens after." Assuming we win. Assuming. Kincaid is exposed and arrested, what then? Barrett turned to face her fully, struck by the complexity of the question. What do you mean? I mean. Lillian hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. I came to Wyoming Territory as a mail-order bride because I had nowhere else to go. My family is gone. My options were limited. If we defeat Kincaid, what happens? To me, then? Do I simply disappear again? Barrett felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of Lillian leaving. Over the past week, she'd become more than just someone he was protecting. She'd become part of the fabric of the Diamond Sea, part of his daily thoughts and concerns. You could stay, he said quietly. There's always room at the Diamond Sea for people who belong here. Belong, Lillian repeated thoughtfully. It's been a long time since I belonged anywhere. Morning Star approached them, her medicine bundle now arranged on a blanket spread on the ground. Before we speak of the future, we must survive the present. The protection ceremony, it requires truth from all who participate. Truth about why we fight, what we defend, what we are willing to sacrifice. Barrett looked around at his assembled men, at Lillian standing resolute beside him, at Morning Star preparing her ancient rituals in the shadow of his grandfather's ranch. Then let's speak truth. The ceremony was unlike anything Barrett had experienced. Morning Star burned sage and sweet grass, the smoke rising in spirals that seemed to carry prayers skyward. She painted symbols on Barrett's forehead with clay mixed with water from the ranch's oldest well, symbols that she said would help him see clearly in the coming battle. The spirits of this land know you, she told him. Know your grandfather's courage, your mother's compassion, your own determination to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They will stand with you. When she turned to Lillian, the Apache woman's expression grew thoughtful. You carry pain, she said simply. Pain from loss, from betrayal, from running, but also strength. Strength that grows from surviving what should have broken you. The clay symbols Morning Star, painted on Lillian's face, were different from Barrett's spirals that spoke of journeys and transformations, of finding home in unexpected places. The spirits see your heart, Morning Star continued. See that you do not fight for yourself alone, but for all women who have been treated as property, as things to be bought and sold. Your courage will inspire others. As the ceremony concluded, Barrett felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The fear was still there, the knowledge that they were about to face deadly danger, but it was tempered by certainty. That they were doing the right thing, that some causes were worth any risk. Chuck Winters approached with the final details of their plan. The fair starts tomorrow, boss. Word's already spreading about the cattle auction. Half the territory will be there, including Kincaid. Count on it. Man like that can't resist a chance to show his power in front of a crowd. Barrett nodded, his mind already moving through the sequence of events they'd planned. The mock auction would draw Kincaid into town, where honest lawmen from neighboring counties would be waiting. Lillian's public rejection of his claims would force him to show his true nature in front of witnesses. And if everything went according to plan, the outlaw would find himself surrounded by men who couldn't be bought or intimidated. If everything went according to plan. There's one more thing, Lillian said, her voice quiet but determined. If something happens to me during this, if Kincaid manages to, nothing's going to happen to you. Barrett interrupted. But if it does, Lillian continued firmly, I want you to know that these have been the best days of my life. Here, at the Diamond Sea, with people who treated me like I mattered. If I die tomorrow, I die free. Barrett felt emotion tighten his throat. You're not going to die. None of us are. We're going to expose Kincaid for what he is, and then we're going to build a life worth living. Together? Lillian asked her, storm-gray eyes searching his face. If you'll have me, Barrett said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "If you can forgive me for dragging you into this fight." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Lillian replied. "You gave me the chance to stop running, to stand up for myself. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Barrett stood with Lillian on the ranch house porch, watching their men make final preparations. Tomorrow would bring the county fair, and with it, the confrontation that would determine not just their individual fates, but the future of justice in the territory. The Diamond Sea. Brand iron lay cooling in the forge, its metal now dark and ready for use. Barrett thought of his grandfather, who had carved this ranch from wilderness through sheer determination, and his mother, who had believed that goodness could triumph over evil if people were willing to fight for it. Tomorrow, they would find out if she'd been right. Lillian's father's cavalry saber lay hidden beneath layers of carefully folded linens in her traveling trunk, its polished steel catching the lamplight as she lifted it for the first time since arriving at the Diamond Sea. The weapon was a relic of honor and duty, carried through battles that had shaped the very territory where she now found herself fighting a different kind of war-god captain. James Avery had been a man of rigid principles and quiet courage, serving with distinction in campaigns that had opened the West to settlement. The saber bore the scratches and nicks of hard use, but also the careful maintenance of a soldier who understood that his weapons were extensions of his will and his honor. "I remember him cleaning this every Sunday after church," Lillian murmured, running her fingers along the blade's edge. "He'd tell me stories about the men he'd served with, the battles they'd fought, the price of peace." Barrett stood beside her in the guest room, watching as she examined the weapon with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic. "He taught you to use it?" "The basics. He said a lady should know how to defend herself, but he hoped I'd never need such knowledge." Lillian's laugh held no humor. "I suppose he couldn't have imagined circumstances quite like these." Through the window, they could see the lights of other ranches scattered across the valley like fallen stars. Barrett had spent the afternoon visiting those neighbors who remained sympathetic to their cause, men like Sam Torres and Bill McKenzie, who remembered when justice meant more than whoever could buy the most badges. "Any luck recruiting allies?" Lillian asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "Some. Torres will have 3 men at the fair, and Mackenzie promised to bring his sons. They're good men, steady in a fight." Barrett paused, considering his next words. Carefully. "But I won't lie to you, Lillian. We're still outnumbered, and Kincaid has the advantage of desperation. A cornered animal is always the most dangerous." "Then we make sure we're more dangerous," Lillian said, lifting the saber to test its balance. The weapon felt familiar in her grip, awakening muscle memories from long-ago lessons in the Avery family's Boston parlor. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Morning Star entered carrying a steaming cup of tea that smelled of herbs and something, indefinable something that spoke of ancient wisdom and carefully guarded secrets. "Drink this," the Apache woman instructed, offering the cup to Lillian. "It will steady your nerves and sharpen your senses for tomorrow." Lillian accepted the tea gratefully, recognizing the gesture for what it was, a sharing of power between women, a passing of strength from one generation to the next. "What's in it?" "Things my grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her. Courage is not just in the heart. Sometimes it must be awakened in the blood." As Lillian sipped the bitter brew, Barrett found himself studying her face in the poor lamplight. Over the past week, he'd watched her transform from a frightened refugee into a woman preparing for battle. The change was remarkable, but it also filled him with protective instincts that threatened to override his rational judgment. "There's still time to change the plan," he said quietly. "You don't have to put yourself in harm's way. We could know." Lillian's voice carried the finality of a blade being drawn from its sheath. "I've spent too many years being afraid, being moved around like a chess piece by men who thought they knew what was best for me. This is my fight, Barrett. I need to see it through." Morning Star nodded approvingly. "The spirits honor those who face their fears. Tomorrow, you will discover who you truly are." The next morning brought news that chilled Barrett's blood. Chuck Winters rode in from town with word that Kincaid had arrived with a larger force than he expected, not just his usual gang, but hired guns and drifters, drawn by the promise of easy money and legal protection. 12 men, maybe 15. Chuck reported, his face grim. "They're staying at the hotel, making no secret of their presence." Kincaid's even got Marshall Hawkins introducing him around as a legitimate businessman wronged by cattle thieves. Barrett felt anger and concern warring in his chest. Any sign that our allies are backing down? Torres is solid. Mackenzie too. But some of the others? Chuck shrugged. "Fear's a powerful thing, boss. Kincaid knows how to use it." Despite the ominous news, the county fair opened with all the pageantry and excitement of a frontier celebration. Banners fluttered in the morning breeze. Vendors hawked everything from ribbon candy to patent medicines. And the sound of fiddle music drifted from the main pavilion, where dancers would gather later that evening. Barrett and Lillian arrived in style. She dressed as the sophisticated Mrs. Catherine Morrison from Denver, complete with an elaborate hat that partially concealed her features. Barrett had to admit that her transformation was remarkable. Gone was the frightened refugee, replaced by a woman of obvious breeding and confidence. "Remember," Barrett murmured as they approached the livestock pens where the mock auction would take place, "you're here to buy cattle, nothing more. When Kincaid makes his move, you let us handle it." "And you remember," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the tension he could feel radiating from her, "that I'm not helpless. If things go wrong, I can take care of myself." The morning proceeded according to plan. Word of the Diamond Sea cattle sale drew interested buyers from across the territory, creating the kind of crowd and confusion that would provide cover for their operation. Barrett found himself scanning faces constantly, identifying allies and potential threats, marking the positions of Kincaid's men as they drifted through the fairgrounds. At noon, Kincaid made his appearance. The outlaw moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. He was dressed like a gentleman, his black suit immaculate, his manner courteous and refined. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature: cold, calculating, predatory. Barrett watched from the auction platform as Kincaid approached the cattle pens, several of his men flanking him at a discreet distance. The outlaw's gaze swept the assembled crowd, lingering on the well-dressed woman who stood near the front with obvious interest in the proceedings. "Fine-looking stock," Kincaid commented to no one in particular, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby buyers. Diamond Sea always was known for quality. It was a probe. Barrett realized Kincaid testing the waters, gauging the crowd's reaction to his presence. The outlaw was too smart to make his move precipitously. He would wait, watch, choose his moment, with the careful calculation of a hunter stalking prey. The auction began with a prize bull, the bidding spirited but controlled. Barrett found himself almost enjoying the familiar rhythm of the event, the way experienced buyers sized up livestock with practiced eyes, the good-natured competition that drove prices higher. Then Lillian Mrs. Morrison stepped forward to examine a group of young steers, and Barrett felt the temperature of the crowd shift perceptibly. "Excuse me, ma'am," Kincaid said, moving to her side with practiced charm. "Jack Kincaid." I couldn't help but notice her interest in these animals. "Are you planning to start a ranch in our territory?" Lillian turned to face him with the poise of a woman accustomed to male attention. "Catherine Morrison," she replied coolly. "And yes, I'm considering an investment in Wyoming cattle. Denver society finds the idea of a woman rancher quite progressive." "Indeed," Kincaid murmured, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made Barrett's hand drift toward his gun. "Have we met before, Mrs. Morrison? You seem familiar." "I think not," Lillian replied. I would certainly remember. For a moment, the two faced each other in the dusty arena, surrounded by the noise and bustle of the fair, but somehow isolated in their own circle of tension. Barrett could see Kincaid's mind working, trying to reconcile what he saw with what. He expected then one of Kincaid's men lean, scarred individual Barrett recognized as Tom Slade whispered something in his boss's ear. Kincaid's expression shifted, hardening into something cold and dangerous. Well, well, the outlaw said softly. Mrs. Catherine Morrison of Denver. How interesting. How very convenient. Barrett knew their time had run out. Whatever game they'd been playing was over, and the real battle was about to begin. The Pinkerton detective badge lay hidden in the false bottom of Barrett's saddlebags, its silver surface worn smooth by years of careful concealment. As Kincaid's men began to close in around the auction area, Barrett made a decision that would change everything. He reached for the badge and pinned it to his vest, letting the afternoon sun catch its polished metal. Ladies and gentlemen, Barrett called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet fairgrounds. I'm Agent Barrett Cole of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, operating under federal authority to investigate territorial corruption. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Conversations died mid-sentence, and even Kincaid seemed momentarily stunned by the revelation. Lillian's face went pale as she stared at Barrett, her storm gray eyes wide with shock. And something that might have been betrayal for the past 6 months, Barrett continued, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. I've been investigating a network of corrupt officials, fraudulent land deals, and criminal enterprises that have been bleeding this territory dry. Today, that investigation comes to an end. Kincaid recovered his composure with predatory grace. How convenient, he said, his voice dripping with false amusement. A Pinkerton badge. I wonder how much those cost these days. It's real, Barrett replied, producing a folded document from his coat. As is this federal warrant for your arrest, on charges of mail fraud, extortion, cattle rustling, and conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. The outlaw's hand moved toward his gun, but Barrett's voice stopped him. I wouldn't, Jack. You're surrounded by federal agents and territorial marshals from 3 counties. The game is over. It was only partially true Barrett had managed to arrange for 2 deputy marshals from neighboring counties to attend the fair. But the federal agents were mostly his own cowboys and allied ranchers. Still, the bluff held weight, especially when backed by official documents and the authority of his badge. Lillian found her voice, though it trembled with emotion. You're a Pinkerton detective. This whole time you've been lying to me. Barrett felt her words like a physical blow. I couldn't tell you. The investigation was too sensitive, too many lives at stake. So I was what bait? A convenient way to draw Kincaid into the open? Before Barrett could answer, Kincaid laughed a sound like breaking glass. Oh, this is rich. The lovely Miss Avery discovers her protector has been using her all along. How does it feel, sweetheart, to learn that you're just another piece in someone else's game? Shut up, Barrett snarled, but the damage was done. He could see the hurt in Lillian's eyes, the way her hand moved instinctively to her father's hidden Colt. No, she said quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. Let him talk. I want to hear all of it. Kincaid's smile widened. Your heroic cowboy isn't what he seems, darling. Been working for the Federals for years, I'd wager. That charity work, that concern for struggling ranchers, all part of his cover. Even his wealth is probably government money, designed to make him look legitimate. The accusations stung because they contained grains of truth. Barrett's Pinkerton work had begun 3 years ago when his father, despite their estrangement, had used his political connections to bring the agency's attention to territorial corruption. The Diamond C's finances had indeed been supplemented by government funds meant to support his cover identity. his charitable work among struggling ranchers had served the dual purpose of gathering intelligence and maintaining his reputation as a good neighbor. It wasn't all false, Barrett said, looking directly at Lillian. My feelings for you, my desire to protect you, that was real. That is real. How can I believe anything you say? Lillian's voice broke slightly. How do I know this isn't just another lie, another manipulation? Marshal Hawkins chose that moment to assert himself, his nervous energy finally boiling over into action. Badge or no badge, Cole, you're interfering with a legal marriage contract. That makes you an outlaw, yourself. A contract obtained through fraud, Barrett replied, pulling out the forged document he'd found after Kincaid's first visit. Take a look at the signatures, Marshal. Compare them to Miss Avery's actual handwriting. This contract is worthless. But, even as he spoke, Barrett could see that Kincaid was preparing for violence. The outlaw's men had positioned themselves throughout the crowd, hands resting on gun butts, waiting for their leader's signal. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, and Barrett knew that one wrong move would turn the county fair into a battlefield. You know what I think? Kincaid said conversationally, his eyes never leaving Barrett's face. I think that badge is as fake as your whole identity. I think you're a cattle thief and a kidnapper, and I think it's time the good people of this territory saw some real justice. The outlaw's hand moved toward his gun, and Barrett tensed for the draw that would decide everything. But before either man could clear leather, Lillian stepped between them. Stop, she commanded, her voice ringing with authority that made both men freeze. Both of you, stop this madness. She turned to face the crowd that had gathered around the confrontation, her chin raised with the kind of courage that came from finally understanding one's own worth. My name is Lillian Avery, she announced, her voice carrying across the fairgrounds. I came to Wyoming Territory as a mail-order bride, but I was deceived. The man claiming to be my intended husband is Blackjack Kincaid, a wanted outlaw who bought my contract through fraud and deception. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people recognized Kincaid's name, and not in a good way. Agent Cole offered me protection when I escaped from that arrangement, Lillian continued. Yes. He lied about his identity. Yes, he used his investigation as an excuse to help me. But his protection was real, his kindness was real, and his courage in standing up to this criminal is real. She turned back to Barrett, her eyes still holding hurt, but also something else understanding, perhaps, or forgiveness. I don't like being lied to, Agent Cole, but I understand why you did it. And I'm grateful for everything you've done, even if your methods were questionable. Kincaid's face had darkened with rage. Enough of this charade. Hawkins, arrest them both for conspiracy and cattle theft. But Marshal Hawkins hesitated, glancing nervously between the Pinkerton badge, the federal warrant, and the hostile faces of the crowd. For the first time, Barrett realized that the corrupt lawman was beginning to understand which way the wind was blowing. That is, Hawkins stammered. What Marshal Hawkins is trying to say, came a new voice, is that he's under arrest for corruption and conspiracy. Barrett turned to see his father, Senator Marcus Cole, approaching through the crowd. Behind him walked two men Barrett recognized as genuine federal marshals, their badges and authority beyond question. Hello, son, the senator said quietly. Sorry I'm late. Traffic from Cheyenne was terrible. The revelation that Barrett's own father was involved in the investigation sent another shock through the crowd. Kincaid's men began to look around nervously, realizing that what they'd thought was a simple kidnapping case had turned into something much larger and more dangerous. Senator Cole, Kincaid said, his voice now holding a note of uncertainty. I wasn't aware you were interested in local law enforcement matters. Oh, I'm very interested, Marcus Cole replied, especially when those matters involve federal crimes and territorial corruption. You see, Mr. Kincaid, This investigation has been going on for quite some time. My son's work has been exemplary, and your organization has been under surveillance for months. Barrett felt a mixture of surprise and grudging respect for his father. Despite their personal differences, the senator had played his part in the investigation perfectly, maintaining the illusion of estrangement while secretly coordinating with federal authorities. Lillian looked from Barrett to his father and back again. So this was all planned? From the beginning? Not all of it, Barrett said honestly. Finding you in that storm, bringing you to the ranch, that wasn't part of any plan. That was just what happened. What I chose to do because it was right. And falling in love with me? Lillian asked quietly. Barrett felt the weight of everyone's attention, but his answer came without hesitation. That was real. That is real. Whatever else you doubt about me, don't doubt that. The moment of honesty hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Then Kincaid's patience finally snapped, and his hand moved toward his gun with deadly intent. But Barrett was ready, and the long-delayed confrontation finally began in earnest. The county fair's Liberty Bell replica stood silent in its wooden tower above the main pavilion, its bronze surface dulled by afternoon shadows, but somehow watchful, as if waiting to witness the moment when justice would finally ring true across the Wyoming territory. Barrett could see it from his position near the auction platform, a symbol of the ideals that had drawn his grandfather west, and that now hung in the balance of what was about to unfold in the tense moments following his father's arrival. Barrett found himself caught between relief and apprehension. The revelation of his Pinkerton identity had changed everything, but not necessarily in ways that made the coming confrontation safer. If anything, Kincaid now understood that he was trapped, and trapped animals were always the most dangerous. We need to clear the civilians, Barrett murmured to his father as they stood side by side, watching Kincaid's men take positions around the fairgrounds. There are families here, children. Senator Cole nodded grimly. Already arranged. Marshal Peterson and his men are quietly evacuating the non-combatants through the north gate. But it'll take time, and I don't think Kincaid is going to give use much of that. Barrett's eyes found Lillian in the crowd. She stood near the livestock pens, her hand resting on her reticule where he knew she carried her father's colt. Despite everything, the revelations, the hurt, the danger, she hadn't fled. She was staying to see this through, and Barrett felt a surge of pride mixed with terror at the thought of her in harm's way. Son, his father said quietly, about the investigation, about the deception, later, Barrett interrupted. We'll talk about it later. Right now, we need to focus on staying alive. Chuck Winters appeared at Barrett's elbow, his weathered face grim. Boss, got word from Torres and Mackenzie. They're in position with their men, but Kincaid's got more guns than we figured. This is going to be ugly. Barrett nodded, his mind calculating odds and angles. Kincaid had perhaps 15 men scattered throughout the fairgrounds, but Barrett's allies numbered only 8 or 9 reliable fighters. The federal marshals added legitimacy, but not much firepower. They were lawmen, not gunfighters, and this situation called for both. What about the town? Barrett asked. Any support from the local folks? Some, Chuck replied. Doc Martins got his shotgun, and Jake Morrison brought his sons. But most folks are just trying to get their families to safety. It was about what Barrett had expected. Frontier justice was a fine concept until bullets started flying, and then most sensible people found pressing business elsewhere. Morningstar materialized beside them with the silent grace that always made Barrett wonder if she had some supernatural connection to the land itself. Her medicine bundle hung at her side, and her dark eyes held the kind of certainty that came from visions or instincts too deep for ordinary understanding. The spirits are gathering, she said simply. Old spirits, warrior spirits. They have been waiting for this moment. What moment? Barrett asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The moment when the wheel turns, when old debts are paid and new paths opened. She looked directly at Lillian, the moment when a frightened girl becomes a warrior woman. Lillian had approached during this exchange, her face pale but determined. "I need to know something," she said, looking directly at Barrett. "Was any of it real? The kindness, the protection, the way you looked at me?" Barrett felt the weight of the question, understanding that his answer would determine not just their personal future, but perhaps his ability to function in the coming fight. A man couldn't shoot straight when his heart was divided. "All of it," he said simply. "The investigation brought me to Wyoming, but you changed everything. You made me remember why justice matters, why some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Even if I can't forgive the lying, even then, whether you forgive me or not, whether you stay or go after this is over, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way that made Barrett feel exposed. But Lillian's expression softened slightly, and she stepped closer. "We'll talk about forgiveness later," she said. "Right now, we have a fight to win." The sound of splintering wood drew their attention to the main pavilion, where Kincaid's men were overturning tables and benches to create makeshift barricades. The outlaw himself stood on the pavilion's raised platform, his black coat flapping in the afternoon breeze like the wings of some carrion bird. "Folks," Kincaid called out, his voice carrying across the fairgrounds with the practiced projection of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. These so-called federal agents are imposters, and I'm here to see that justice is properly served." "He's good," Senator Cole muttered. "I'll give him that." Making himself sound like the injured party. "He's desperate," Barrett corrected, "and that makes him more dangerous than good." Marshal Peterson, one of the legitimate federal officers, stepped forward with his badge displayed prominently. "Jack Kincaid, you're under arrest for mail fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Surrender yourself and your men, and no one else needs to get hurt." Kincaid's laughter echoed off the pavilion's wooden walls. "I don't think so, Marshal. You see, I've got a legal marriage contract and a legitimate grievance. Mr. Cole, there has been harboring stolen property, my bride, and interfering with lawful business. The contract is fraudulent," Peterson replied. "We have evidence." "Evidence can be manufactured," Kincaid interrupted, "especially by corrupt federal agents working with cattle thieves and kidnappers." Barrett realized with growing alarm that Kincaid was actually winning the war of words. To the handful of civilians still present, the situation must look confusing at best. A wanted outlaw claiming to be a legitimate businessman, federal agents who might or might not be imposters. A marriage contract that both sides claimed was either legal or fraudulent. In the absence of clear moral certainty, people tended to side with whoever seemed strongest, and Kincaid's men were making an impressive show of force. "Time to end this," Barrett said, stepping forward into the open space between the two groups. "Kincaid, you and I both know what this is really about. It's not about marriage contracts or federal investigations. It's about your power to intimidate and corrupt, and my determination to stop you. Is it now?" Kincaid's smile was sharp as a blade. "And what do you propose, Agent Cole? A duel at high noon? How delightfully old-fashioned." "I propose you surrender yourself and your men to federal custody. Do that, and I guarantee you'll get a fair trial and proper treatment." "And if I refuse?" Barrett's hand rested casually on his gun butt. "Then we settle this the hard way." The fairgrounds had grown eerily quiet, the usual sounds of celebration replaced by the tension of impending violence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when words would give way to action. Kincaid glanced around at his positioned men, calculating odds and angles with the cold precision of a professional killer. Barrett could almost see the outlaw's mind working, weighing the costs and benefits of various courses of action. "You know what I think?" Kincaid said finally. "I think you're bluffing. I think you've got maybe half a dozen real fighters and a handful of federal agents who've never been in a real gunfight. I think when the shooting starts, you're going to discover that justice is just another word for whoever has the most guns." "Maybe," Barrett acknowledged. "But there's only one way to find out." As if his words were a signal, the Liberty Bell in its tower began to chime not with the celebratory peals of a county fair, but with the slow, solemn tolls that marked momentous occasions. Someone, Barrett realized, had decided it was time for justice to ring across the Wyoming territory. The last chime faded into silence, and Barrett knew the talking was over. Whatever happened next would be decided by courage, skill, and perhaps a little luck, but mostly by the choices that people made when everything they valued hung in the balance. The auctioneer's gavel lay forgotten on the wooden platform where moments before it had directed the orderly business of livestock sales. Now it served as an ironic reminder of how quickly civilized proceedings could dissolve into primitive violence, its polished oak surface reflecting the harsh afternoon sun that seemed to spotlight the confrontation unfolding. Beneath the county fair's colorful banners, Barrett's hand hovered near his Colt as Kincaid's men completed their positioning. Around the fairgrounds, the outlaw had chosen his moment well. The evacuation of civilians was only half complete, leaving enough innocent bystanders to complicate any law enforcement response. Women clutched their children, while husbands debated whether to flee or stand and fight, their faces reflecting the terrible uncertainty of frontier justice. "Last chance, Kincaid," Barrett called out, his voice carrying across the dusty arena. "Surrender now, and this ends without bloodshed." Kincaid's response was to draw his gun with the fluid grace of a man who had killed before and expected to kill again. "I don't think so, Agent Cole. You see, I've built a reputation in this territory, and that reputation is worth more than my life." The first shot came not from Kincaid, but from one of his men positioned near the horse corrals, a wild shot that shattered a water barrel and sent splinters flying. It was the signal both sides had been waiting for, and the county fair erupted into chaos. Barrett dove behind the auction platform as bullets whined overhead, his mind automatically cataloging the positions of Kincaid's men and his own allies. Chuck Winters had taken cover behind an overturned wagon with two of the Diamond C hands, their rifles already speaking in measured volleys. Torres and his men were engaging targets near the main pavilion, while Mackenzie's sons had found good positions in the livestock pens. The federal marshals, to their credit, were performing their duty with professional competence despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Marshal Peterson had taken position behind the judge's stand, his badge glinting as he called out warnings to civilians still caught in the crossfire. But it was Lillian who surprised everyone. As bullets flew and men dove for cover, she moved with purposeful calm toward the main pavilion where Kincaid had positioned himself. Barrett's heart nearly stopped as he saw her walking upright through the chaos, her father's Colt now visible in her hand, her face set with the kind of determination that came from finally understanding one's own power. "Lillian, get down!" Barrett shouted, but she either didn't hear him over the gunfire or chose to ignore his warning. Kincaid saw her coming and laughed, a sound that cut through the noise of battle like a blade through silk. Well, the little bride finally shows some spirit. Come to surrender yourself, darling." "I've come to end this," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the violence swirling around her. "You want me so badly? Here I am. Let these other people go, and we'll settle this between us." "How noble," Kincaid sneered, but Barrett could see calculation in the outlaw's eyes. Lillian's offer was tempting. She was, after all, what he'd come for originally. "And what exactly are you proposing? A trade? Me for safe passage out of the territory for you and your men?" Barrett felt cold fury wash over him at the thought of Lillian sacrificing herself. He began moving from cover to cover, working his way toward the pavilion. But Kincaid's men were alert, and their crossfire was deadly accurate. "That's generous," Kincaid said, "but I think I prefer my original plan. You see, sweetheart, this has gone beyond simple business. Your boyfriend there has made this personal, and I don't leave personal matters unfinished." The outlaw's next shot was aimed not at Lillian, but at Barrett, the bullet splintering the wooden post beside his head. It was a message as clear as spoken words. Kincaid intended to kill them both, along with anyone else who stood in his way. That's when Lillian raised her father's Colt and fired her first shot. The bullet took one of Kincaid's men in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind the pavilion's makeshift barricade. It wasn't a killing shot, but it was accurate enough to prove that Captain Avery had taught his daughter well. "The next one won't be a warning," Lillian announced, her voice carrying a new edge that made even Kincaid pause. The battle raged on around them, but Barrett found himself focused entirely on the confrontation between Lillian and Kincaid. This was the heart of it. He realized not the larger questions of territorial corruption or federal investigation, but the simple, fundamental struggle between those who would take what they wanted by force and those who would stand against them. Chuck Winters appeared at Barrett's elbow, breathing hard from his sprint across the fairgrounds. "Boss, we've got them contained, but barely. 2 of Torres's men are down, and we're running low on ammunition." Barrett nodded, his eyes never leaving Lillian's small figure facing down the most dangerous outlaw in the territory. "Hold your positions. This isn't over yet." Lillian's father's unfired Colt felt different in her hands now. No longer a burden of memory, but an instrument of her own will, its weight familiar and reassuring as she faced down Blackjack Kincaid across the chaos of the county fair. Weapon that Captain James Avery had hoped his daughter would never need to use was finally fulfilling its purpose, not as a tool of violence, but as a means of protection for those who could not protect themselves. "You know," Kincaid said conversationally, his own gun trained on her with steady precision, "I'm almost impressed. Takes real grit to walk into a gunfight like some kind of frontier saint." "I'm no saint," Lillian replied, her voice carrying across the pavilion with calm certainty. "I'm just a woman who's tired of running from bullies." Around them, the battle continued to rage. Barrett could see his allies holding their positions, but the cost was mounting. Doc Martin had taken a bullet in the leg while trying to reach a wounded civilian, and one of Mackenzie's sons was pinned down behind an overturned table with blood seeping through his shirt. But the tide was turning. Marshal Peterson and his federal agents had finally gotten organized, their coordinated fire driving Kincaid's men back toward the pavilion. Torres had worked his way around to the east side of the fairgrounds, where his methodical rifle work was picking off exposed targets with deadly efficiency. Most importantly, the corrupt Marshal Hawkins had finally chosen a side, the winning one. As Kincaid's position became more desperate, Hawkins quietly moved to join the federal agents. His badge finally meaning something again, Barrett seized the moment to make his own move. While Kincaid was focused on Lillian, Barrett sprinted. From his cover behind the auction platform, diving and rolling as bullets chewed up the ground around him. He came up running, his Colt in hand, closing the distance to the pavilion with grim determination. Kincaid saw him coming and swung his gun toward this new threat, but Lillian's voice stopped him cold. "You move that gun away from me, and I'll put a bullet in your heart," she said with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally discovered her own courage. "My father taught me to shoot, Mr. Kincaid. He also taught me that some people need killing." The outlaw found himself caught between 2 threats, Barrett approaching from one side, Lillian holding steady from the other. His remaining men were either down or retreating, and the sound of federal badges shouting orders was growing louder by the moment. "You're finished, Kincaid," Barrett called out as he reached the edge of the pavilion. Your men are surrendering. Your corrupt marshal has switched sides, and you're surrounded by federal agents. Give it up. For a moment, Kincaid seemed to consider the offer. His cold eyes swept the fairgrounds, taking in the tactical situation with the calculating mind of a professional survivor. Barrett could almost see him weighing his options, looking for some angle that might yet save his skin, and the outlaw's face hardened into something terrible and final. "If I'm going down," he snarled, "I'm taking her with me." Kincaid's gun swung back toward Lillian with deadly intent, but she was ready. The lessons her father had drilled into her as a girl breath control, sight picture, smooth trigger pull came. Together in a moment of perfect clarity, the Colt bucked in her hands, its report echoing across the fairgrounds like thunder. Kincaid's shot went wild as Captain Avery's bullet found its mark, spinning the outlaw around and dropping him to the pavilion's wooden floor. Barrett reached them both in 3 quick strides, his own weapon trained on Kincaid as the man writhed, on the ground, clutching his shoulder. It wasn't a killing wound, but it was enough to end the fight. "It's over," Barrett said, and for the first time in what felt like hours, his voice held something other than tension. "It's finally over." Lillian looked down at the smoking Colt in her hands, her face pale but composed. "I shot him," she said, as if the reality was just sinking in. "You stopped him," Barrett corrected, moving to her side. "You protected yourself and everyone else here. Your father would be proud." Around them, the sounds of battle were fading into the more prosaic noises of wounded men being tended and prisoners being secured. Marshal Peterson approached with federal handcuffs, his professional demeanor barely concealing his relief that the confrontation had ended without more bloodshed. "Jack Kincaid," Peterson announced formally, "you're under arrest for mail fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As the marshal secured his prisoner, Barrett finally allowed himself to focus on Lillian. She stood quietly in the afternoon sunshine, still holding her father's Colt, her storm gray eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions too complex for easy naming. "How do you feel?" Barrett asked gently. Lillian considered the question, with the seriousness it deserved. "Different," she said finally. "Like I'm not the same person who jumped from that stagecoach a week ago." "You're not," Barrett agreed. "You're stronger now. Stronger than you ever knew you could be." Morning Star appeared beside them with her usual silent grace, her medicine bundle still hanging at her side. The Apache woman studied Lillian's face with eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul. "The spirits are pleased," she announced. "You have found your courage, and your courage has found you. The circle is complete." As federal agents and local allies worked to restore order to the fairgrounds, Barrett found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A week ago, he'd been a lonely detective living a lie in service to a greater truth. Lillian had been a frightened refugee, fleeing from a fate she couldn't control. Now, they stood together in the wreckage of their enemies' ambitions, forever, changed by the choices they'd made and the courage they'd found in each other. The county fair's Liberty Bell chimed again from its tower, but this time the sound was celebratory, the voice of justice finally speaking clearly across the Wyoming territory. The simple gold wedding band caught the morning light streaming through the Diamond C's kitchen window, its smooth surface unmarked by the elaborate engravings or precious stones that might have adorned the jewelry of wealthier couples. But Barrett had chosen it specifically for its simplicity, a symbol of honest love rather than ostentatious display, a promise as enduring as the Wyoming landscape that surrounded their home. 3 months had passed since the county fair confrontation. 3 months of healing and rebuilding and learning to live with the consequences of courage. Black Jack Kincaid sat in the territorial prison awaiting federal trial, his network of corruption finally exposed to the harsh light of justice. Marshal Hawkins had been stripped of his badge and faced his own legal proceedings, while honest. Men like Marshal Peterson worked to restore faith in territorial law enforcement. Barrett's Pinkerton investigation had officially concluded with commendations from Washington and a standing offer to take on additional assignments. He'd politely declined, choosing instead to focus on the Diamond Sea and the life he was building with the woman who had shown him what real courage looked like. Second thoughts? Lillian asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway dressed in the simple blue dress that had become her favorite, the same color as the wool she'd worn that first night when Morning Star had worked her quiet magic of transformation. About marrying you? Barrett smiled, slipping the ring into his vest pocket. Never. About whether I deserve you? Every day. Stop that, Lillian said firmly, moving to the stove where coffee percolated with cheerful, bubbling sounds. We've had this conversation. We both made choices that brought us here, and they were good choices. Through the window, Barrett could see the guests beginning to arrive for their wedding ceremony. Sam Torres and his family had ridden over from their spread, along with Bill Mackenzie and his sons. Doc Martin came in his buggy, his legs still stiff from the bullet wound, but his spirits high. Even some of the townspeople, who had been skeptical during the investigation, had come to pay their respects to the couple whose courage had helped clean up the territory. Most surprising of all was Senator Marcus Cole's presence. Barrett's father had arrived the previous evening, his manner awkward but sincere, as he tried to bridge the gap that had opened between them years ago. I know I haven't been the father you needed, the senator had said during their private conversation the night before. Your mother's death, the political pressures, the way I threw myself into work to avoid dealing with grief, it wasn't fair to you. We both made mistakes, Barrett had replied, surprised by his own willingness to forgive. But maybe it's not too late to make better ones. Now, watching his father help arrange chairs in the front yard, Barrett felt something he hadn't experienced in years' hope for reconciliation, for the possibility that families could heal even after deep wounds. Morning Star emerged from the guest bedroom, where she'd been helping Lillian with final preparations. The Apache woman's face glowed with the satisfaction of someone whose deepest hopes had been fulfilled. She is ready, Morning Star announced. The spirits are pleased. They say this union will bring many blessings to the land. Barrett nodded, touched by the older woman's approval. Over the past months, Morning Star had become more than just the heart of the Diamond Sea. Household, she'd become the bridge between his old life and his new one. The keeper of wisdom that helped them all navigate the complexities of love and forgiveness. The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by Judge Harrison from the county seat, a man whose integrity had been proven during the investigation, and its aftermath. They spoke their vows under the cottonwood tree where Barrett's grandfather had once signed the deed to the Diamond Sea, surrounded by friends and family and the vast Wyoming sky that seemed to bless their union with its endless promise. Do you, Barrett Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? I do, Barrett said, looking into Lillian's storm-gray eyes and seeing there the courage that had saved them both. Do you, Lillian Avery, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? I do, Lillian replied, her voice carrying the same steady certainty she'd shown when facing down Black Jack Kincaid. The simple gold band slipped onto her finger with gentle precision, and Barrett felt the last piece of his life fall into place with satisfying completeness. After the ceremony, as guests shared food and conversation under the warm afternoon sun, Barrett found himself standing on the porch with Lillian, watching their friends and family celebrate their union. Chuck Winters was telling stories to a group of fascinated children, while Torres and Mackenzie debated the merits of different cattle breeds with the passionate intensity of men who lived close to the land. Any regrets? Barrett asked, echoing Lillian's earlier question. Only one, Lillian said, leaning against his shoulder with comfortable familiarity. "I wish my father could have been here to see this, to see me finally find my place in the world." Barrett squeezed her hand gently. "I think he can see it. And I think he's proud." As the sun began to set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Barrett thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A week of deception and danger had transformed into months of honest courtship and steady love. Fear had given way to courage, loneliness to companionship, uncertainty to the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. The Diamond C brand iron still lay in the forge, ready for the spring branding that would mark another year of growth and prosperity. Barrett's Pinkerton badge was locked away in his father's old desk, a reminder of duties fulfilled and a chapter closed. Lillian's father's Colt hung above the fireplace, honored not as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of the courage that protected the innocent. "What are you thinking about?" Lillian asked, noting his contemplative mood. "About circles," Barrett replied. "About how sometimes the ending of one story is really the beginning of another. And what story are we beginning?" Barrett looked out across the vast expanse of the Diamond Sea, seeing not just land and cattle, but possibility. The possibility of children running through these same yards, of grandchildren learning the lessons that Morning Star and experience would teach them, of a legacy built not on political ambition or material wealth, but on the simple courage to stand between the vulnerable and the vicious. "The best one," he said simply. "The very best one." As the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, Barrett and Lillian Cole stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by the love of friends and family, protected by the strength they'd found in each other, and blessed by the infinite promise of the Wyoming Territory that stretched endlessly before them. The mail-order bride who had leaped from a vine stagecoach into a blizzard had found her home at last, and the lonely detective who had lived too long in shadows had discovered that the best investigations led not to arrests and convictions, but to love and redemption and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Their story was complete, but their life together was just beginning.